Yeah, I mean, for me, I prefer using the word ingenuity because ingenuity is born from intuition. When I hear the word innovation, I always either think, I still actually think top down, and I also definitely think outside in. But for me, I just think anything that is of worth in the world comes first from the inner world, then gets reflected in the outer world. Yeah, I think for me, one of the aspects of, well, what's like ingenuity? And ingenuity to me is actually born of curiosity. I don't think creativity is always born of curiosity, but ingenuity is the ability to almost like the ingenious solution is almost like, I didn't think of that. And why I love it is because I didn't think of that means someone else greater or a universal mind thought of it, not just this born of the physical. I think it comes from a more almost spiritual dimension, I think, in my opinion. Yeah. Absolutely, because I think you have to tap the inner riches first. The wealth that, I always kind of say to people, if they can go into their intuition, there is more resources, books, libraries, anything there that actually exists in this kind of outer kind of world. I think that sometimes, and the hardest thing with intuition is it never comes as a complete picture. Intuition only actually ever comes as a fragment. Right? And what you actually do is that the fragment then slowly, you work with it to be able to, it will reveal the full picture, a bit like a photograph that gets developed. But you must believe within the fragment is the whole. And that's kind of the thing. And that's most of us always want to see the complete picture kind of straight away, which is what the book kind of gives us. And it's almost like it's an unfolding of time. And most of us don't know how to exist within an unfolding. We demand it all right here, right now. It all has to be seen. But I prefer working in the realm of the 99% invisible, while for me, innovation a lot of the time is the 1% visible. And so I always kind of say, like a lot of the times people say, what do you do? And I say, I read the air. Oh yeah, can you get more abstract than that? Okay, well, what I'd kind of say is like reading the ether. I think that there's the best way to kind of explain it would be, say, some of these environmental issues that we have at the moment. Are they still part of a Cold War remnant that is still an aspect of fear that's still kind of there? As I said earlier, I really believe in Dr. Brené Brown's work in regards to you must understand shame and vulnerability if you want to innovate and to be creative. And I think you must almost be able to read the shame that kind of pervades the air or the vulnerability. It's to be able to speak about that which is unspoken. And within the unspoken is where the genius actually exists. Yeah, again, coupled with like judgment, what will people think, running everything through an outside kind of filter. But for me, I always kind of say I'm very interested in Jung's work with the shadow. And in that sense of, as I was kind of saying earlier, if you kind of say you're creative, well, the antonym of that is sterile or uncreative or inspiring, uninspiring, etc. The beauty and ugly, tall and short, both have to kind of exist within each other. Or if you look at the Tao, the yin and the yang, because we almost only want to see, and a lot of my work that I've been doing actually with young adults is you watch them and they want to just cherry pick all the ups of life, none of the downs, right? But it's within the wholeness, that's the canvas where life actually is. It's one of those things that you might think something that happens to you today is the worst thing, but in 5 years down the track it was the best thing. You being sacked or made redundant led to a new career choice or whatever it actually is. We can't see everything in the fullness of time. And I think that's what we do at the moment. We just want either just the quick wins or just the ups, but there's so much value in the downs. Like think about all the businesses that are born out of a recession, right? Because they're born out of a true, genuine need. It's not about stirring false needs and desires when we've got kind of a bubble economy kind of going. There is great beauty and richness that's kind of there if we kind of only allow ourselves to go there. But we always think when we're in a down or when we're in an antonym of a positive, adjective or verb that we want to be, that it's forever, that it's permanent. It's not. It's just a snapshot, it's just a moment in time, it's just kind of temporary. And I think it's because we don't create with this idea that everything shall pass. We almost have a very fixed view of creation. It's so, we want to kind of hold it in a way, but it's very fragile and it's very temporal. And that's why I love, so much of my work has been influenced from my time living in Japan, which is the temporariness and the kind of fragility of life that you kind of need to connect to really build lasting creativity. It's almost like to not own it, in some sense. You see it as almost a gift that you kind of give, not something that is mine and you own. Yeah, I must do this because there's a deadline attached to it, or someone's kind of paid some money or things like that. For me, I just kind of think that the creativity that kind of flows is born when a solution or an idea has almost like, it wants to be known. And I kind of always say to people, it's like, can you shepherd through a fragment of an idea into the light of day? And so it's almost like, but not all of them should be shepherded through. Like some of them it could be for somebody else, or the timing might be right. But it's almost like, what does it take to take it from the invisible to the visible? And am I the right person to shepherd it through? And a lot of the times people kind of like, they want to nameplate everything. No, it's all kind of mine, but it's not. And it's like, I think that's because we don't see ourselves as a collective member of humanity. We have almost all this segmented, regimented, the way that the corporations are kind of run, that there isn't any of that, almost the cohesive or the unilateral thought. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's huge. I mean, my God, where do you begin? But I guess one thing, like with the government, a lot of the times when I speak and people say, oh, we love your trends and what you do and your work and that, and I'm like, no, you don't. You just like what I provide for you in a space, which is to discuss the ideas which never get discussed. And so a lot of the times what you're doing in the consultation with government is actually, it's never what you're actually saying, it's about the space that's kind of being created. I have to do a lot of work with property developers, and I really like this idea of, architecture being about it's about the skin and not the shell. Right? It's about almost like, how do you actually are one with the environment? And so much of it is like, you first decide what is the moment that you want to have occur there, and then you design around that moment instead of building a shell structure and try to force everything to fit the way that you actually wanted it to. I think when government consults with community, it's very much about being first able to say, tell me about the design of life. And then let's, in this process of co-creation, see what we can actually build. But it's actually the first step is, and the hardest thing to do is, how do you hold space? How do you hold space to have the ideas and the discussions that really matter? Because, that's saying, like, remove the unnecessary so the necessary may speak. We're so cluttering our minds up with the unnecessary that what needs to be spoken or said will actually only happen through a crisis first bringing it to our attention. And I think the other aspect of it is, it's only in the anecdotal that I really believe that knowledge sharing mostly happens through informal communication. And it's in the anecdotal. It's like when I don't read, when I look at a newspaper, I don't read the story online, I just read the comments section. It's like when you go to a conference, all the information that you need to know happens in the bar afterwards. So how do you place yourself at those nodes, at those receptor points? And like I say, everyone can do what I do. It's about placing your mind in a state of receptivity. What government needs to do when it interacts with the community is place its mind in a state of receptivity, while usually it's trying to force an agenda. Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, how do you exist without an agenda? How do you exist without a timeline? All of us are kind of like, time's money. That's the mentality that we've got. How do we have these kind of open-ended kind of discussions? And I think one of the things is like, yeah, there must almost be a boundary that's kind of set, but how can it be a porous kind of boundary? But I think when you say, well, how do you kind of bring these kind of ideas kind of through? It's almost like being able to kind of say, what at the end of the hour would have been the most important issue for us to discuss? Let's start with that. And so I think it's really being able to kind of say, you might have an idea of what you believe is the most meaningful or kind of valuable thing to get out of the meeting, and so might they. But I think it's like, when I kind of say, it's like knowledge of one person, wisdom of another to a new higher organic form, it's the combination. So what you're actually trying to see is, between what we're both parties are kind of saying, where's the overlap? as such, and where can we build from that aspect? Because it's only from, you know, when we both feel familiar and comfortable with each other, can you actually then actually have an element of trust that the guard comes down to what really needs to be said to be said. But a lot of the times, if you're trying to win an election, there's a veneer. And also a lot of the times the people, they're not even present because it's just like a checklist of people that I have to speak to for community consultation. Yeah, because I think like everyone always says to me like, oh, what makes a great leader, or what makes a really great entrepreneurial state and things like that. And one thing that's really important is an ecosystem. Anything only exists within an ecosystem. It doesn't exist within a singularity. So say it's like entrepreneurship. Well, like, are you teaching it at university? Is there tax breaks, you know, for entrepreneurs, things like that? So there must be the ecosystem that supports it. But it's almost like, how do you make the conditions that make it conducive to be able to be so? Is it free Wi-Fi in the city? Like, it's almost like, what is that gives rise to it? That's why I love nanotechnology, the difference between the world of the made and the world of the born. What can you do to create the conditions that allow it to be birthed? That becomes really interesting about how you do that. Absolutely. And if you are on a tight time scale or things like that, you almost don't allow space for the accident to happen, almost in a way. And also I think it's really, I always kind of say like, in the future, the two most successful characteristics a person must have is you must be the super connected networker. You must be out there, you know, spreading the consciousness and your awareness across lots of things. But then you must also learn how to be the hermit. How do you take hermitage and umbrage almost in a way and battle against the ideas in your own individual mind before you kind of bring them out to be discussed? And as I said earlier, it's like we don't build that period of reflection in, it's not kind of valued. So what then happens is we're always just working of a derivative of an idea and edits of edits as such. We never know how to go back to the source. And to me, that source is how do you go back to the stillness within, to the gap that exists between those kind of thoughts? Because at the moment we just like exist in a monkey mind of other people's paraphrasing and thoughts. But if you actually just say to someone, no, what do you really think about this? Most people might be able to kind of like generate a quote from somebody else, but they don't know almost how to ask first within inside and then to be able to phrase it back as in a feeling statement. As I said earlier, a trend is always an unmet need and it's always an emotion. Emotions are going to be the language of this 21st century. This is the language of when we say we're moving from like meaning, from like a needs into this meaning want. The language that will take us there is the one of the emotions. And most people don't have the fluidity in that because it's not allowed to be discussed. There's there's a great professor of innovation here at the University of South Australia, and he talks about, you know, you've got to have relevance of your idea, you've got to have novelty, you've got to have genesis, which is like completely paradigm kind of shifting, but also any innovation requires elegance. And I think that's what's kind of really missing at the moment in regards to cities, in regards to, if I can particularly say Adelaide, is because there's great knowledge can be born from beauty. And I always kind of funny, if I look at it in food, it's one of those things that, you know, where we'd rather have the $6.90 big muffin or slice of cake with the frothy cappuccino instead of, say, in Paris, like a little macaron and a short black, the elegance and the daintiness of that. And I think that that's what I really, again, learned from living in Japan is like the art of the presentation, because it's not actually valued here because we don't dwell in the realm of the subtle. Cities, I feel in the West, are much more about the gross and the obvious. If I can give an example of the ryokans, which are traditional Japanese inns, oftentimes they cost $800 per person per night. So two of you, at least minimum $1,600. There is no art on the walls. There is nothing there. There's no even bed. It's a futon that kind of gets rolled out. But when they actually make your bed in the evening, it's the way that the hostess will place the light and the shadow that it forms, that if you're in tune enough, you'll go, that was $800, that way that light is kind of formed there. But most of us, our mind is too busy. Where's the TV? Where's the food? Where's the in-service room menu? We can't place ourselves at that. And that's why it's so fascinating to study lights, shadows, and those aspects, and how you bring that into the city, and the complexity to be able to say, wow, at 9 o'clock this place looks different to 12 to 3, but we're almost not allowing ourselves to see through those eyes. Because when we see, we don't actually see within the lightness, the darkness. We always go straight into the labeling, not just looking at the shape, don't notice the color and things like that. We don't notice the granularity of life. And I would say for the thing for Adelaide to make that difference is to put the attention on, you know, the detail, the subtle, the elegant, the aesthetic, and the rare. And almost by lifting that, it's almost like it becomes a pedestal on which you place the vase. We place all the attention on the vase. Far better to place the attention on the pedestal. That it's almost like, how do you illuminate and uplift? And I always believe life is made up of what is in the ordinary and not the extraordinary. And we seem to overlook the ordinary here, but that's where the extra in the ordinary actually lives, in your routine, in your habits and things like that. So how can you elevate the aesthetics of that? Is really key. Just a small quick thing I just think is to illustrate is that I was working in London on a project, and it was an advertising agency, and they were pitching for a luxury client. But because Nestle was one of their clients, what they brought out during the tea and coffee break was Kit Kats and instant coffee. And I'm like, where's the French press and the handmade truffle? Like, it's almost like you have to match the environment. And I think you can actually have, I believe in beautiful thoughts. If you watch the film A Beautiful Mind, or in Numbers and things like that. And I think it's the external and the inner, like it's almost like the mirror neurons start replicating each other. And I think it's about, I'd actually ask people in Adelaide, it's a bit of a grand statement, but could you raise your standard in aesthetics? And I'm not saying this is that when you go to Paris and Milan, everyone's beautifully kind of dressed, but there's a love of promenading. Right? Just the very fact of promenading and sashaying down the street, it's the journey with the direction. It's not like it's a destination, and it's not just like aimless kind of wandering, but taking great pleasure in that kind of that art of just being. I think we could see some great things happen here. Very simple thing, you know, whether it's meditating or finding a way to kind of still the mind. But I would every day just do one thing differently. You always order coffee, today order tea. You know, you always have a gin and tonic, I don't know, go the Scotch and Coke. You know, you always put the left leg of your trousers in first, go the right. Just make those small kind of little aspects of just going, I wonder because most of us don't know how to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And so that's kind of one of the things to be able to kind of say. The other aspect I'd kind of tune into that would be to be able to have more of a guardianship or a stewardship mindset. So it's almost like, what would it be in 2 or 3 generation time? Like, go beyond, have more of a legacy thinking in that which you do, and to see the one is connected to the all. It's just small things. But yeah, just try to order a cup of tea instead of a coffee and see what that does for you.